The early morning sunlight poured over the paths of the real countryside, dotted with dewy crystals. The inhabitants of the village were accustomed to a quiet life, living each day in peace and routine. However, this tranquility is shattered by a strange phenomenon. One morning, a large number of crows suddenly appeared in the forest at the edge of the village. Instead of flying around, they gathered in one place, forming a black vortex as if in a strange dance. The cries of the crows echoed in the air, reaching the ears of the village from time to time. The inhabitants stood in front of their windows, witnessing all this, confused and disturbed. Initially, it was thought to be a mere coincidence. Perhaps the crows had gathered together for some kind of food. However, strangely enough, every morning, the crows would gather in the same place, forming a mysterious black assembly. They kept coming in and out, like a dark guardian, guarding some unknown secret. The residents of the village began to discuss this strange phenomenon, with some offering various speculations and some believing that it was an omen of something ominous that was about to happen. However, no one could really explain why the crows gathered in that particular place, and no one dared to approach that forest to find out the truth of it. As time went on, the number of crows seemed to be increasing and their cries became more eerie. Some of the residents began to feel uneasy, thinking that there might be some kind of supernatural power hidden behind it. They began to avoid that forest, unwilling to explore its mysteries. However, no matter how much they avoided it, the cawing of the crows continued to echo every morning, as if warning everyone in the village. The mysterious migration continues for some time, and the tranquility of the real countryside seems to be shattered by this strange phenomenon. The inhabitants felt an unspeakable uneasiness in the black crows, and they began to look forward to the day when they would be able to unravel the mystery. However, before they realize it, this is only the beginning of the story, and something even more terrifying is about to come. As the summer sun gradually rises and pours over the fields of the real countryside, the crops that should be flourishing begin to show unusual changes. Initially, these changes were so insignificant that they were barely noticeable. But as time went on, the residents began to gradually notice something unusual. The ears of wheat in the wheat fields began to lose their vitality, and their color, which should have been golden, became dull, as if their life force had been sucked out by some unknown force. The corn plants in the cornfields gradually withered, their green leaves becoming yellow, and even the vegetables in the vegetable gardens began to wither and rot. The residents began to feel confused and anxious, and they could not understand why the crops had suddenly become so weak. Initially, some people thought that it was due to the bad weather. After all, the weather was so changeable that it might affect the growth of the crops. However, as time went by, they began to realize that it was not just the weather. One day, the farmers in the village gathered to discuss this serious problem. They were reporting varying degrees of damage to their crops, and they observed the same thing occurring in farmland throughout the village. People began to wonder if the soil had been contaminated in some way, but they were unable to find conclusive evidence to prove it. Meanwhile, the places where the crows were gathering continued to have a mysterious atmosphere, as if they were hinting at something unusual. Some people began to link the crows to the withering of the crops, suggesting that it might be some sort of supernatural force at work. However, their speculations were not confirmed either, and the uneasiness in the village gradually increased. People began to have strange dreams at night, in which they were in a desolate field with dry crops everywhere, and crows circled overhead, uttering mournful cries. They felt an indescribable fear in the dream, as if some dark force was gradually eroding their lives. The scenes in the dream were so realistic and terrifying that the people remained uneasy even after waking up. As the crops withered more and more, the inhabitants of the real countryside began to seek answers. They began to research about the soil and climate in an attempt to find a solution to the crop problem. Unbeknownst to them, however, deeper and more eerie forces may be involved behind the problem. Under the blazing summer sun, the mystery of the real countryside widens, and the threat becomes more and more apparent. The days of summer continue to pass in the real countryside, but the anxiety of the inhabitants escalates. The crops are wilting more and more, and the gathering of crows remains mysterious. However, just one ordinary evening, the peace of the village is shattered by a terrifying disappearance. Tommy is the grandson of the village headman, a lively and lovable little boy. He is loved by everyone in the village and runs and plays happily around the village every day. However, just one night, he suddenly disappears, as if swallowed by the earth. When Tommy's disappearance is discovered, the village is thrown into chaos and panic. The residents began to look around, searching the entire village and the nearby forest, but no trace of him could be found. The people of the village watched every corner with a mixture of hope and fear, hoping to find him somewhere. However, all efforts bore no fruit. The news of the disappearance soon spread throughout the village, and one by one the residents wore expressions of worry and helplessness. Tommy's parents wept and called his name through the village, but the only response was silence. The missing child loomed over the real countryside like a shadow at nightfall. Some began to speculate that Tommy may be lost and stranded somewhere in the wilderness. However, others offered even more frightening speculation that Tommy might have been taken captive by some evil force. Some residents recall the previous gathering of crows and begin to wonder if Tommy's disappearance had anything to do with it. The missing child brings fear and confusion like never before. The people of the village begin to wonder if all of this is a consequence of the crows and the phenomenon of blighted crops, and they begin to feel an invisible threat looming over the village. As night falls, the village becomes unusually silent, except for the cries of the crows that echo in the air, as if telling a chilling secret. The missing child became an unshakable suspense, and his name became a taboo word in the village. Everyone speculates where he might have gone and what might have happened to him. On a supposedly peaceful summer night, the inhabitants of the real village spend their time in helplessness and uncertainty, praying for the missing child and at the same time praying that the village will return to its former tranquility. As night falls, the inhabitants of the real village begin to fall asleep. However, their dreams become exceptionally horrific and twisted. In the silence of the night, one nightmare after another begins to haunt the people of the village. Elizabeth, an older villager, closes her eyes and enters a terrifying dream. In the dream, she is in a dark forest, desolate and dead everywhere. She saw crows circling the treetops, uttering mournful cries as if they were sending her some kind of warning. She tries to escape, but no matter how she runs, she cannot get out of this horrible forest. Meanwhile, Tom, a young farmer, falls into a similar dream. He finds himself standing in the middle of a parched farmland. His crops withered and the earth cracked as if life had been drained out of him. Crows hovered above his head, their cries growing shriller as if mocking his helplessness. Tom tries to call out, but his voice is blown away by the wind, and his footsteps plunge into the dead earth. The dream not only haunts one man overnight, but the people of the entire village experience similar nightmares. In the dream, they were led into a barren world where the cries of the crows were like a mockery, and the horror of the scene suffocated them. The dream seemed like a dark portent, warning everyone in the village, even if they didn't know exactly what it meant. Everyone woke up with a look of fear on their faces and unease in their hearts. They began to communicate and realized that they had experienced similar dreams, the details of which were so realistic that it seemed like a real scene. People began to associate the gathering of crows and the wilting of crops, and they began to speculate as to whether these dreams were related. The late-night nightmares plunged the people in the village into even deeper confusion and fear. They did not know the meaning of these dreams and could not explain why so many people were experiencing similar experiences. On a quiet night, a strange atmosphere pervades the village, and people begin to suspect that there may be some kind of supernatural power hidden behind it all. The inhabitants of the village are lost in late-night nightmares of horrific sights that unsettle and confuse them. This anomaly sparks more speculation and debate, and a depressing atmosphere pervades the village. However, it is at this unsettling moment that an ancient villager suddenly steps forward with a dark revelation about the truth. The old man's name is Samuel, and he is a hermit in the village, living in a remote hut. Samuel has long been considered a mysterious figure, and legend has it that he holds many secrets about the village. To the bewildered stares of the village's inhabitants, he walked slowly up to the central square of the village. In the night, Samuel began to recount a tale of the village long ago, a tale of mysterious dark forces. He described an ancient curse, a worship that sought refuge with a deity to whom the people of the village used to offer their lives in sacrifice. And this deity, the Lord of the Ravens, needed the sacrifice of life to maintain its power. Samuel explains that the crows are the messengers of this deity, and that the withering of the crops is the wrath of the deity. He claims that there is a deep connection between the gathering of the ravens and the missing children, and that the dreams are warnings that the deity is trying to convey. His words are filled with ancient wisdom that provokes shock and fear in the inhabitants of the village. As the truth emerges from Samuel's descriptions, people begin to understand how it all happened. They realize that the missing children, the gathering of crows, and the withering of the crops are all signs that that ancient curse has returned. This curse demanded life offerings to keep the gods powerful. Upon hearing this dark revelation, the people of the village fell into a deep state of shock and fear. They begin to question their lives and begin to think about how to deal with this terrible curse. In Samuel's words, they seem to sense the presence of evil forces, and that they must unite to resist this threat. After this dark revelation, the people of the village begin to realize the gravity of the danger they face. They know that they must take action to find a way to lift this curse and save the village from being destroyed by the forces of darkness. And at this critical moment, an even greater challenge awaits them. A battle that will require courage and determination is about to unfold. Samuel's dark revelation shakes the inhabitants of the real village, who realize that they are facing not just missing children and withering crops, but a battle for the survival of the entire village. In the days following the revelation, tension and anxiety fill the village as people begin to search for a cure. Samuel reveals that in order to lift the curse, a reversal ritual must be performed, in which the sacrifice of a life is used to counteract the wrath of the gods. However, the details of the ritual are extraordinarily complex, requiring the use of ancient incantations and mysterious instruments. He explains to the people of the village that although it is a dangerous ritual, if they do not act, the entire village will be consumed by dark forces. The people of the village followed Samuel's guidance and began to gather the necessary materials and instruments. They searched ancient books, learned incantations and the steps of the ritual, and continued to delve into them in an attempt to understand the mysteries. In the process, they showed unprecedented unity and determination, for they knew that only through cooperation could they hope to free the village. The ceremony of reversal was arranged to take place on a gloomy night, with moonlight pouring through the gaps in the leaves of the trees in the central square of the village. The people formed a circle, holding hands and facing the mysterious apparatus. Samuel stood in the center of the circle and began chanting an ancient incantation, his voice echoing like a call in the night sky. As the ceremony began, the entire village was plunged into a mystical atmosphere, as if the boundaries with supernatural forces were beginning to blur. The cries of the crows echoed in the night sky, as if they were witnessing this crucial moment. The people closed their eyes and participated in the ceremony intently, doing their best to convey their wishes and determination. However, the ceremony did not go well. During the chanting of the spell, the people of the village felt an invisible resistance, as if some dark force was trying to stop their efforts. Their brows furrowed and sweat oozed from their foreheads, but they did not give up. They continued to chant incantations, constantly adjusting their intentions in an attempt to fight the dark force. As the ritual progressed, people felt a powerful energy begin to surge, and the air in the circle seemed to freeze. The calls of the crows became sharper, as if they were responding to the ritual and sending some sort of message. Samuel's incantations grew louder, his voice filled with determination and hope. In the night, the reversal ritual continued as the people of the village tried to defeat the forces of darkness, lift the curse, and save their village with sheer determination and unity. Their heartbeats seemed to be synchronized with this mysterious ritual, each breath an expression of perseverance and faith. However, whether or not they will succeed, whether or not they will be able to defeat the forces of darkness, all hangs in the balance. Night covered the entire true countryside, and the ritual of reversal continued. The will and determination of the people became their weapon against the forces of darkness. However, they also realized that victory would not come easily. As the ceremony reached its climax, a sudden gust of cloudy wind blew through the sky and clouds began to surge, obscuring the moonlight. The cries of the crows became unusually shrill, as if they were calling out for some kind of power. Those in the circle felt a powerful energy as darkness began to seep in, making people's hearts tighten. Samuel's incantation grew louder and louder, his voice filled with determination and firmness. People clasped each other's hands tightly, their hearts filled with the desire for victory. However, the resistance of the dark forces grew stronger and stronger, and the conduct of the ceremony became exceptionally difficult. At this critical moment, the faces of one individual gradually turned pale. They felt the threat of the darkness, but were also unwilling to give up. Suddenly, a dark energy fell from the sky and hit the people in the circle. They felt a great shock, as if they were being destroyed by an invisible force. The ritual incantation was interrupted and Samuel's voice disappeared. The cries of the crows became unusually mournful, and a suffocating atmosphere of darkness pervaded the entire village. Under the threat of this darkness, the people of the village felt fear like never before. They knew that the dark forces were trying to stop them, making the reversal ceremony impossible. However, they also understood that now was their last chance, and that they had to focus all their strength on a duel with the dark forces. The people clasped each other's hands and began to restart the incantation, trying to rekindle the flame of the ceremony with their firm will and determination. The calls of the crows became more shrill, as if trying to tear at their will. However, the voices of the people became louder, their heartbeats racing and determined, as if they were challenging the power of the darkness. The ceremony came to a climax once again, and the entire village seemed to be enveloped in a layer of light. The will of the people was strengthened in this moment, their hearts linked together to form a force that could not be broken. The cawing of the crows faded, and the darkness began to dissipate. Eventually, the ceremony reached its apex, and a bright light rose from the people in the circle, breaking through the gloom of the night sky. The dark forces were repelled, and the cawing of the crows became progressively calmer. The voices of the people merged into one, forming a firm song, like marching towards the dawn of victory. In this duel with the darkness, the inhabitants of the real countryside showed incomparable courage and unity. With firm faith and unyielding will, they overcame the power of darkness and successfully completed the ceremony of reversal. And in the joy of victory, they also understood that the battle to defend the village may not be over, and a greater test may still be waiting for them ahead. After the ceremony of reversal, the inhabitants of the real countryside felt a peace and tranquility they had never known before. The dark atmosphere gradually dissipated and the cawing of the crows became progressively calmer. The people realized that they had succeeded in repelling the dark forces, lifting the curse, and bringing new hope to the village. However, they also knew that the challenges they faced had not completely disappeared. The missing children still had not been found, and the withering crops still needed to be addressed. In saving the village, they must face the reality of their problems and use their efforts to find solutions. The people of the village begin to replant their crops in an effort to restore life. They learn the skills of farming and try different methods in hopes of regaining a bountiful harvest. With their efforts, the crops gradually begin to grow again, and the summer fields come back to life. At the same time, people began to actively search for the missing children. They went deep into the forests, searched the rivers, and kept expanding their scope in the hope of finding clues to the children. Despite the difficulties and challenges they faced, they did not give up, confident that their efforts would eventually pay off. However, in the process, the people of the village also began to think about their past behavior. They realized that the offerings they once made to give their lives for the shelter of the gods were the root cause of the curse that had befallen them. They began to reflect, hoping to learn from their past mistakes and not repeat them. Over time, peace and prosperity returned to the village. Crops thrived, and the inhabitants of the village rediscovered hope and courage in their lives. The fate of the missing child is also finally revealed. He is found, weak but still alive and preserved. In the process of salvation and redemption, the inhabitants of the real countryside learn to be united and courageous. They overcome not only the forces of darkness, but also their inner fears and hesitations. With strong faith, they guarded their beloved village and created a brighter future. This story shows that even in the face of difficulties and darkness, as long as one's heart is united with faith, one can overcome all difficulties and seek the path of salvation and redemption. The inhabitants of the real village became brave heroes, and their story will live on forever as an inspiring symbol of strength and hope.